Attorney General's Office, which is the Procuraduría General de la República, the PGR, which is the public office with respect to all of these issues. And Lila, welcome. First of all, welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much, Agustín. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
And Lila, so you've been around, right? I mean, it's in a good way.
Thank you. Please make that.
Beginning with the fact that you're a fellow Hoya, right? You're
Yes,
from
I am.
Georgetown, but you spent a lot of time dealing with international issues, both as an academic and eventually in the pre. And now you're at the Attorney General's office, so you've got this full view of how things are going. Let's talk about let's start from the top, right?
Okay.
International cooperation, right?
Yep.
Which is basically international relations, very specific to different topics. How is that going here in North America?
Well, I mean, right now, like you said, I've kind of had different hats in these past few years, and currently at the Attorney General's office, in terms of international cooperation, it's been a really large project that they have to kind of implement in the next couple of years. As you were congressman, that they have to implement the new accusatorial system, from a mixed system to a more oral system, sort of like they have in the United States. And this international cooperation is going to be key for how we implement this new project going ahead. I don't think that there's a reference of the type of magnitude of project that we have to undergo to establish this new justice system in Mexico, because we do have 127 million Mexicans, and we have to literally transform an institution that is key for rule of law, which rule of law leads to investment and leads to a better, it's the base.
I keep saying that, rule of law is the number one issue in Mexico.
It's the number one issue. And the good thing is that we have cases, specific country cases that have undergone this sort of transformation. And we're really leaning towards cooperating with other countries, Chile, Argentina. Currently,
just for the viewers at home.
Yes.
These are countries that, like Mexico,
right.
They went from a system that was based on paperwork,
right?
Just sort of paper shuffling.
Yes.
You even never got to see the judge that was seeing your case, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
And then transiting to an accusatorial system with presumption of innocence, which is also relatively new. That was 2008 reform, if I remember correctly.
2008.
And now to a system that is much more open, right?
Exactly. And what it really...
By the way, are you guys getting blowback from the judges?
You know what? Not really, because a lot of the judges were reappointed in 2008, so they're kind of moving along with the time scheme. So that's been really good. I think the real challenge going forward is working with international organizations like the Inter-American Development Bank, which we are working with really closely. They are kind of accompanying the PGR in this new transformation from here to almost 8 years. Like in the 2008 reform, they gave an 8-year span, and in 2016, all 32 states in Mexico had to implement this new system. Obviously, there's some states like Oaxaca and Chihuahua that are way more advanced in implementing this new justice system.
Oaxaca and Chihuahua?
Those are some of the ones that have.
That's interesting. Who's at the forefront?
Well, I think the governors. I think it is a very state, a federalist sort of kind of organization. They have to implement, and they kind of took the lead and decided to push it forward. Some other states, and it's not that they're not willing to do it. We have to take into consideration that a project of this magnitude, you have to have training, you have to have human capital, you have to have infrastructure, you have to have capacity building, and you have to grow eventually confidence in our citizens that they do trust this new justice reform and that they do trust the judges. And like you said, in this new oral form of trials, it's very similar to the United States, where there's an alternative measure.
Not the jury, right?
Not the jury, but there's alternative measures, and it's not always just going to jail, right? So incarceration is not always the final sentence, and these alternative measures like plea bargains and settlements kind of allow for more cases to be sort of passed and not have to go to trial necessarily. You know that our jails here in Mexico, like a lot of problems in the penitentiary system in the United States, they're overpopulated.
Right.
Because petty crime is always sentenced with jail time instead of having alternative measures.
And we end up calling them universities of crime, right?
Well,
because they all get pushed together, and so some guy who might have done a petty crime is suddenly with this guy who's done, kidnapping, and he learns the trade.
Criminal organizations, and then they become specialized in that arena, and then they come out of jail and they're experts in crime. On another hand, what we're doing, or what the Attorney General Office is really doing, because they're really focusing on the institution. It's not just so much about the ego of the people involved, but it's really about building an institution that's going to sort of lead to the future of Mexico. So in mid-August, there's going to be a meeting where there's going to be 18 different attorney generals from Latin America, Spain, and perhaps the Attorney General Sessions is going to be present, where they're going to come together.
If he's still in the job.
If he's still in the job. That's why I said perhaps. Did you catch that? You never know in this administration. But he is invited sort of to come up with a regional plan, because a lot of the things that are happening, they don't share information. So some of them are even like franchises where criminal organizations do the same kind of crime in the same kind of manner in Mexico, in Colombia, in Chile, in Argentina. And since there's no cooperation, no regional cooperation,
nobody knows.
Nobody knows. And instead of just reacting post-crime, why don't we really follow the root problem, of the criminal organization and how they maneuver the product and how they get across the different countries. So that's sort of what is building towards that meeting in mid-August.
One step back. So you mentioned all of this international cooperation.
Yes.
I remember that USAID, right? USAID, which is the United States State Department. It's the development agency of the United States government. One of the things that they were funding was the dissemination of information and the teaching of the right people with respect to this new accusatorial system. Correct.
Right.
Now there's basically there's a war on the State Department, right? Where they're reducing budget and all of this. Is that continuing? What's going on with that?
We work very closely with the United States. USAID was kind of critical in the beginning stages of this new reform justice system. Like you said, they were very instrumental in training judges, in training the personnel that are going to lead towards this new transformation. The problem is where we're lacking is really training of the police, which are going to be essential in recovering evidence and really kind of presenting that to the judges and making a clear case, right, at trial. So that kind of training is something that we are going to have to keep doing going forward, because it's critical for the new kind of system where you have a trial and there's more transparency and you kind of go and defend your case. So we're working closely with them. Definitely the United States has always been an important partner in these kind of reforms, especially.
Did you feel an interest? Because I know that you guys were with the Attorney General, and you were part of that group that went up to D.C. recently. You talked to these high-level officials, you talked to Sessions and all of these people. Did you see that a political will to continue cooperating with Mexico?
Most definitely. I was pleasantly surprised to find that the current Attorney General, Raul Cervantes, and Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General of the United States, they hold a very good relationship. Also, Secretary Kelly, which is now Chief of Staff, was also here in Mexico.
Right, of course. But when you guys met, he was the
Secretary
head of
Homeland
Security, and now he's the Chief of Staff at the White House.
And it was a very open conversation.
Kelly gets Mexico, right?
Kelly gets Mexico. I mean, he kind of, he was the general for Southcom, and he gets it. He knows what the problems are in Mexico, and he also understood that there's a problem of demand in the United States. That's where the market is. Now, Mexico, we know this kind of rhetoric and this kind of discourse that has been going on since, the 90s and even before. But really kind of this acceptance that there's a problem of consumers in the United States. And he was in the state of Guerrero where, that's where really
that was an interesting trip. I mean, he actually visited the state of Guerrero, which is like the most dangerous state in the Union. It's where Amapola is where opium poppies are being grown. What was the takeaway on that? Because there's no rule of law there.
There is no rule of law, and like you said, the cultivation of poppy, and there's almost a tsunami of production in heroin. A lot of reports have, kind of put that data forward. And what they're trying to do is kind of understand why the people in the state of Guerrero are cultivating poppy seed. And it's because there's unemployment. there's a huge inequality in the state, and these people are getting paid ridiculous amounts, not in the sense ridiculous that they get paid nothing, right, for cultivating these poppy seeds. But the problem is that they don't have any other source of employment. So what they're trying to understand is, for example, morphine, the cultivation of morphine in Mexico is illegal, but we are the we import ridiculous amounts of morphine into Mexico because we can't produce it. But the state of Guerrero, they can produce it. The problem is if we just eradicate the cultivation of poppy seeds and we don't provide them with an alternative source of employment, then they're gonna keep falling back into the drug trade. So what they're planning is to sort of say, okay, if we need morphine in Mexico, and this is something that would have to pass through Congress, obviously, and they can have an employment in producing something legal so that they still retain their employment, but now they're kind of brought down from the drug trade, and they still have another source of employment, then that could be a good alternative. Instead of just eradication, instead of, coming in and taking away their produce, because even though it's illegal, they have a need to feed their families. And that's something that I think Secretary Kelly understood. The fact that he was there sends a really good signal that he's trying to get to the source.
Huge message.
It's a huge message. And also the director of the CIA, Pompeo, was there, came to Mexico. And the cooperation is there. I think that there's a clear understanding that cooperation amongst both countries is essential to produce positive results in the near future.
And could you give us the groundwork for cooperation across the board? So there's information sharing?
Yeah, I mean, there is information sharing. I think that one of the key points that they're going to touch upon in this meeting that I just mentioned in August with all of the attorney generals is precisely that. There's so many cases, there's so many kind of crimes that are committed regionally where information sharing is key. Because if they don't share or if they want to withhold information because they think that it's part of their investigation and they don't want to have other information.
Territoriality, no?
Territoriality, and that's something that hasn't worked. So there has to be a compromise. There has to be an understanding that it's a regional effort and that information sharing is going to be essential to kind of dismantle these criminal organizations.
That's great, Lila. Very, very impressive. Thank you very much for being here, Lila Abed. Just to note, she is working here in Mexico. She's Mexican.
Yes, I am.
Despite the perfect accent.
Oh, well, look who's talking, Agustín.
Yes. Exactly. So just to share that with the audience at home.
I am.
Thank you very much,
Thank you so much.
So we're going to be talking with Gabriel Hernandez. He's joining us today.